Okay, in this explainer, we're going to aggressively pull back the curtain on the whole mythical overnight success of the Disney empire. I mean, when we see the Cinderella castle today, or, watch one of those flawless animated masterpieces, it's incredibly easy to just assume the man behind the mouse was handed a magic wand. But the reality? Well, the foundation of this multi-billion-dollar legacy is actually built on a staggering, chaotic series of absolute failures. I want to start by dropping a bit of a bombshell to immediately shatter any expectations you might have about Walt being recognized early on as some flawless genius. Get this. He was fired from a Missouri newspaper at just 22 years old because his editor literally believed he lacked creativity. Just imagine firing the future pioneer of global entertainment because he had no good ideas. It's a pretty stark reminder that someone else's inability to see your brilliance, yeah, that's not a failure. All right, Section 1. The illusion of overnight success. So if we contrast the incredibly gritty, desperate beginnings of this young animator with the polished, globally dominant brand we all know today, we find a staggering number: 300. Before the magic was ever real, Walt was denied over 300 times by financiers when pitching his original Mickey Mouse concept and his theme park ideas. Think about the emotional stakes there, the crushing weight of hearing the word no that many times. Most people would throw in the towel at 10. Walt just kept refining his pitch. Overcoming those early failures wasn't just a bump in the road for Disney. Those failures were the exact blueprints that forged his legacy.
Just look at this timeline compressing his 1920s. It was incredibly turbulent. We're talking a complete roller coaster of brief highs and devastating lows. He founds a studio, it goes bankrupt. He creates a hit character, he gets it stolen. This definitely wasn't a gentle, scenic climb to the top. It was a completely chaotic survival story.
Moving right along to Section 2, bankrupt before the magic. Walt's first major boss battle was the catastrophic failure of Laugh-O-Gram Studio in Kansas City. This was his first real attempt at building an animation firm, and, well, it was a systemic insolvency disaster. He signed a predatory distribution contract with a company that actually went bankrupt before fully paying him. The visceral disaster of this situation is honestly hard to overstate. He was entirely broke. To keep going, he literally slept on the floor of his office, ate beans out of a can on credit, and had to walk down to the local union station just to bathe once a week for 10 cents. But here is exactly where the magic of failure happens: the pivot. Walt learned the hard way that being a creative visionary is completely useless if the business itself isn't structurally sound. This bankruptcy catalyzed a core principle of the Disney legacy. He realized he desperately needed a logical, numbers-driven business manager, so he brought in his brother, Roy Disney, to manage the finances. Honestly, without Laugh-O-Gram failing so spectacularly, the legendary Walt and Roy partnership might never have even formed. Which brings us to Section 3, the stolen Lucky Rabbit. Fast forward to 1928. Walt and Roy are finally back on their feet in California, producing a hit new character. But they're about to receive a brutal lesson in the cutthroat realities of the entertainment biz. Walt had created Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, and it became a massive commercial success. But when Walt went all the way to New York to ask for a budget increase, his distributor, Charles Mintz, completely ambushed him. Mintz had secretly signed almost all of Walt's animators to his own studio and informed Walt that Universal, not Disney, actually owned the copyright to Oswald. So in one devastating blow, Walt lost his star character and his entire staff.
Now the absolutely crucial point here is how Walt reacted. He didn't surrender. Instead, he instituted what we can call the Sovereign IP Directive. Walt vowed to never, ever again relinquish control of his studio's creations. On the train ride back to California, having lost pretty much everything, he sketched a new character that he could own entirely. Yep, Mickey Mouse. That intense Disney obsession with copyright control that completely defines the company today, that was born directly from the trauma of losing Oswald.
All right, Section 4, Disney's Million-Dollar Folly.
By the mid-1930s, Walt realized those short cartoons were barely paying the bills. They needed a full-length animated feature. Now, this was something the industry literally laughed at, famously dubbing the production of Snow White Disney's folly. And to be fair, the skepticism was kind of warranted. The initial budget for Snow White was $250,000, but because Walt demanded unprecedented quality using this crazy new multi-plane camera, the budget absolutely exploded to $1.5 million. To put that into perspective, that's equivalent to over $30 million today. They were standing on a massive financial cliff.
And the personal risk was just immense.
To fund this terrifying deficit and actually finish the film, Walt and Roy literally mortgaged their own homes. They had to beg Bank of America for final loans just to drag the project across the finish line. Make no mistake, if Snow White had flopped, the Disney studio would have been completely wiped off the map.
But they pushed through, and the pivot changed history. Snow White became the highest-grossing film of all time until Gone with the Wind came along. The immense profits allowed Disney to transition from basically scraping by on short cartoons to establishing a massive, highly profitable, self-sustaining feature film studio infrastructure over in Burbank, California. That risk of total failure? It literally purchased their permanent independence.
Let's move to Section 5, the Black Sunday Disaster. Jumping ahead to July 17, 1955, Walt is attempting something no one has ever done before, opening a massive, immersive theme park. But the magical expectations severely clashed with a nightmare reality. See, it was supposed to be an invite-only event for 15,000 people. Instead, massive counterfeiting meant 28,000 people flooded the gates. Even worse, a plumber strike during construction forced Walt to make a hilarious but terrifying choice: finish the working water fountains or finish the working bathrooms. Walt famously chose the toilets, noting that, well, people could drink soda, but they couldn't pee in the streets.
And let me tell you, that lack of water was a huge problem because it was a blistering 100 degrees that day. The newly poured asphalt was literally melting, trapping women's high heels right in the pavement. The Mark Twain riverboat, it was so overloaded with people that it derailed and sank into the mud. Oh, and a gas leak started a fire near Sleeping Beauty's castle. Just picture all of this happening while 90 million viewers watched it live on a glitchy national television broadcast.
It was a public relations nightmare that executives later dubbed Black Sunday. But the pivot here is an absolute masterclass in operational adaptability. Walt didn't hide. The very next day, he brought the press back, faced the issues head-on, and spearheaded rapid operational updates. He used this literal meltdown to pioneer and codify the modern theme park management systems that make Disney parks the absolute gold standard for crowd control today. Finally, Section 6, the Resilience Blueprint. So, what does this all mean for us? We can bring this historical narrative directly back to you. This isn't just history. It is a framework with practical takeaways on reframing the failures in your own life. When we summarize these events, we can clearly prove that each acute failure was actually a necessary structural stepping stone. Laugh-O-Gram's bankruptcy, that forced the creation of a stable financial partnership. Losing Oswald, that forged their ironclad IP ownership. Black Sunday's chaos, that built their operational excellence. The legacy isn't despite the failures, you guys, it's because of them.
Walt himself understood this deeply. He famously said, "You may not realize it when it happens, but a kick in the teeth may be the best thing in the world for you." It humanizes him completely, right? He knew for a fact that surviving the worst-case scenarios strips away your vulnerability and actually forces you to innovate.
We can apply this practical psychology to your own life by looking at 4 crucial questions from the University of Calgary that you should ask yourself when you fail. What can I learn from this? What could I have done differently? Do I need to work on certain skills? Where can I ask for help? Disney asked all 4 of these when his first studio collapsed, and it literally changed the entire trajectory of global entertainment. I really want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. If we can prove that failure is actually the architecture of a lasting legacy, that it provides the very bricks and mortar for future resilience, then what could your current setback be preparing you to build? The next time you face a massive hurdle, remember the melted asphalt and the stolen rabbit. Don't waste the failure. Use it to forge your own magic. Thanks for hanging out and learning with us on this explainer, and we will catch you next time.